Mark had lived in many places during his years as a firefighter, but this new neighborhood felt different. It was calm, clean, and full of families who waved at each other when they drove by. After spending long shifts responding to emergencies, he wanted a quiet place where he could finally relax. So when he bought the small house on the corner, he truly felt like he was starting fresh. He spent his first week unpacking boxes, washing the porch, and arranging his backyard so it would be perfect for small gatherings. He was a simple man. He didn't need fancy things, just good friends, good food, and peaceful evenings. A month after moving in, his birthday came around. He did not want anything big or loud. All he wanted was a friendly backyard BBQ with the people he trusted most, his friends from work. Many of them were police officers he knew from emergency calls. Mark always admired how they handled tough situations with calm minds. They respected him too, especially because firefighters and police often worked together. Over the years they had survived dangerous moments, shared many meals, and built a bond stronger than most friendships. To Mark, they were like family. He sent them simple messages. Hey, birthday BBQ at my place. Nothing fancy. Come if you're free. Almost everyone said yes. Some joked, we better not hear the smoke alarm from a firefighter's house. Others teased, if there's trouble, at least we'll have a whole police station at your party. Mark laughed and told them it would just be a peaceful night with grilled food and cold drinks. Before hosting anyone, Mark reread the HOA rules carefully. The Homeowners Association was known to be strict. They had rules about when people could mow their lawn, what color curtains were allowed in the front windows, and where guests could park their cars. Mark didn't want any trouble, so he made sure every detail was perfect. He placed trash cans properly, checked noise level hours, and even told his friends to park only where the HOA allowed. To him, following the rules was easy. He just wanted a smooth evening. But there was something Mark didn't fully understand. Yet every neighborhood had that one person who believed they controlled everything. In this neighborhood, that person was Linda. Almost everyone called her HOA Karen behind her back. She liked to patrol the streets with a clipboard, as if she were a police officer herself. She wrote notes about who left their trash can out too long, who had a small crack in their mailbox, or who planted flowers that were not HOA approved. She didn't do it quietly either. She talked loudly about keeping order, stopping chaos, and following the rules exactly. Most neighbors avoided her. Some felt she meant well, but others thought she enjoyed the power too much. Mark had never met her, but he had heard a few warnings. One neighbor whispered, be careful around her. She reports people for breathing too loud. Another said, if she sees more than 3 cars in front of your house, she'll think you're throwing a wild party. Mark shrugged these comments off. He wasn't afraid of her. He was used to handling real emergencies, fire accidents, dangerous situations. What could an HOA lady possibly do? The sun was still up when the first of Mark's friends arrived on the day of the beep. They laughed, hugged him, and carried trays of food into the backyard. Music played softly from a small speaker, not loud, just enough to create a good mood. Mark stood at the grill wearing his apron that said, firefighters know how to turn up the heat. Everyone joked about it. The smell of grilled chicken and smoky ribs filled the air, and the sound of friends talking echoed warmly across the yard. Everything felt peaceful, perfect, even, but peaceful moments never lasted long when Linda was around. She noticed the cars first, 3, then 4, then 5, all parked neatly and legally along the curb, but in her mind, more cars meant trouble. She stood at her window, squinting through her blinds like a detective on a stakeout. She muttered, to herself, without HOA approval. On a weekend, absolutely not. She grabbed her clipboard, the same one she carried for every minor complaint, and marched outside. Mark saw her approaching, and his first thought was that she was just a curious neighbor. He smiled and waved, but she didn't wave back. She stopped at the edge of his driveway, her face tight like she was smelling something bad. Are you the homeowner? She asked sharply. Yes, I am, Mark replied politely. Can I help you? What is happening here? She demanded, pointing at the grill, the chairs, the cars, everything. It's just a small birthday BBQ, Mark said with a friendly smile. All within HOA rules. But Linda didn't want to hear that. She folded her arms and lifted her chin. Parties require notification. These cars look like an event. I hope you understand that the HOA expects proper communication. Mark stayed calm. He had dealt with shouting citizens during fires. This was nothing. I checked the rules. This is allowed. There is no noise violation, and the cars are legally parked. She narrowed her eyes. I know the rules better than anyone. I will not let chaos start in this neighborhood. Mark wanted to laugh at the idea that a calm BBQ with police officers could be called chaos, but he stayed respectful. I promise everything is fine. Would you like to check the rules again? Linda huffed loudly, turned around, and marched away without another word. As she left, a few of Mark's friends whispered, uh-oh, trouble. Another officer joked, should we arrest her for disturbing the peace? They all laughed, but Mark shook his head. He didn't want drama. He just wanted a peaceful birthday. However, Linda had already made up her mind. In her world, any gathering she didn't approve of must be stopped. She mumbled to herself as she walked home. They think they can ignore me. I'll show them. She believed she was protecting the neighborhood from dangerous activity, even though nothing dangerous was happening. She didn't know who the guests were, and she didn't care. She felt threatened by anything that wasn't under her control. Mark, unaware of the storm she was creating in her head, returned to the grill and continued cooking. He was happy, relaxed, and surrounded by people he trusted. He didn't know that Linda was dialing 911 at that very moment. He didn't know she was reporting his peaceful BBQ as a loud and suspicious gathering. He had no idea she was sending active police officers straight to a house full of off-duty police officers. The calm before the chaos was almost over, and the funniest part, the only person who didn't know how this story would end, was Linda herself. The evening was going well. Laughter filled the backyard, the smell of grilled food floated through the air, and Mark felt a rare sense of peace. His friends, a mix of off-duty police officers and fellow firefighters, were chatting about work, stories, joking about the silly things they had seen on the job. Someone tried to flip a burger and ended up with it half on the grill and half on the ground. Everyone laughed, and Mark shook his head, smiling. He felt grateful for these moments, simple and joyful, where no alarms were ringing, no fires were blazing, and no one was in danger. It was just friends, food, and good conversation. Meanwhile, Linda had returned home, still simmering with irritation. She couldn't shake the sight of so many cars in front of Mark's house. In her mind, this was more than a small birthday party, it was a potential disaster waiting to happen. She went inside and started writing notes on her clipboard, detailing what she believed were violations. In her world, she had to protect the neighborhood at all costs, even if it meant creating unnecessary drama. They have too many guests. They didn't inform the HOA. What if it gets louder? She muttered as she tapped her pen on the paper. She was convinced she was doing the right thing, even though she had no real evidence of any rule being broken. Back at the party, Mark's friends were completely unaware of the storm brewing next door. Some of them were playing a casual game of cornhole, tossing beanbags into the wooden holes while laughing at each other's misses. Others were sitting around a table, sipping drinks and sharing funny stories about their days on duty. One of the officers, Officer Ryan, started teasing Mark about how he always tried to host the most peaceful gatherings. Despite being surrounded by people trained to respond to emergencies, Mark laughed, shrugging. "What can I say? I like a calm party for once in my life," he joked. No one imagined what was about to happen. Linda, feeling the need to escalate the situation, decided she couldn't just write notes or complain quietly. In her mind, the HOA rules weren't enough to stop this chaos. She believed it was her duty to involve higher authorities, people who could enforce order. She picked up her phone and dialed 911, fully convinced that she was reporting a dangerous situation. To her, multiple parked cars, loud laughter, and people outside at night was reason enough for concern. She spoke rapidly to the operator, emphasizing her fear and worry. "There's a gathering happening at the house on the corner," she explained. "It's loud, it's suspicious, and I think something bad could happen. I need someone to come immediately." She hung up, feeling a sense of righteousness, convinced that she had saved the neighborhood from potential disaster. Inside the backyard, Mark noticed that the music had to be turned up slightly to compete with the occasional sounds of passing cars on the quiet street. The guests continued to joke and tease one another, unaware that their evening was about to change. Some neighbors peeked over from their yards, curious about the laughter and the aroma of grilled meat. A few waved politely. Everything seemed normal, calm, and friendly. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood evening Mark had hoped for when he moved in. Then, Mark's phone buzzed. A text from a neighbor he barely knew popped up. "Did you know someone called the police about your party?" At first, Mark laughed, thinking it was a joke. Who would call the police about a quiet backyard BBQ? He thought, but as he read the message again, he realized it wasn't a joke. Something was about to happen, something he hadn't expected. He glanced toward his driveway, trying to see if any patrol cars were coming. For a moment, nothing seemed wrong. The evening still felt calm, but Mark's instincts, sharp from years as a firefighter, told him to stay alert. The first sign of escalation was subtle. A distant siren wailed, faint but unmistakable. The guests paused their conversations, glancing toward the street. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was coincidence, while others, especially the police officers in the group, instinctively noticed the siren's tone and volume. "That's not close enough to be an emergency near us, but it's headed this way," Officer Ryan said quietly. Mark felt a twinge of worry. He still didn't know who had called or why, but his calm demeanor kept everyone from panicking. "Probably just a passing call," he said, trying to reassure his friends, even though he couldn't completely ignore the sound. Meanwhile, Linda watched from her window with satisfaction. In her mind, she had successfully initiated action. Soon, she imagined officers would arrive, assess the situation, and she would be seen as the hero of the neighborhood, the person who had stopped an unruly gathering. She didn't realize that she had no idea who was actually at the party, and that the people gathered were trained professionals who knew exactly how to handle tense situations. Her excitement and anticipation made her pace back and forth, her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand as she rehearsed her explanation to any arriving officers. "I'm protecting the neighborhood. I'm just following the rules." She felt proud of her diligence. As the sirens grew louder, a few guests in the backyard started to notice flashing lights in the distance. The playful, relaxed atmosphere shifted slightly to one of curiosity and concern. "Looks like someone's on the street," someone remarked. Mark tried to laugh it off, but his mind raced. He began thinking about how to explain the situation if officers arrived. "Just be calm, friendly, and honest," he told himself. He knew that even though his friends were off duty, on-duty officers would follow protocol until they verified there was no threat. He didn't want anyone to be unnecessarily embarrassed or anxious. Linda's call had set a chain reaction in motion. The dispatcher, unfamiliar with the situation, sent officers to the address provided, unaware that the backyard was full of trained law enforcement professionals. Each passing moment increased the tension. Although Mark's friends remained mostly oblivious, joking and preparing food, some began to speculate, laughing nervously, about what could happen if police did show up. "We might have to arrest the person who called," one of them joked. Another laughed and said, "Imagine the look on her face if she realized she called us." No one could have predicted just how ironic the situation was about to become. Then the moment came when multiple police vehicles turned the corner and slowed near Mark's house. Flashing lights lit up the street, reflecting off the parked cars. Neighbors peeked from windows, curious and whispering to each other. Mark's friends instinctively froze, recognizing the familiar uniforms and badges. "Well, this is interesting," one whispered under his breath. "We know them all, but they don't know us yet." Mark took a deep breath, remaining calm, but a mixture of nervousness and anticipation ran through him. Meanwhile, Linda, standing behind her window, watched the lights and imagined herself vindicated. She felt certain that the officers would scold Mark, reprimand the guests, and appreciate her for taking action. Her chest swelled with pride. She had successfully escalated the situation, she thought. She didn't realize that she had no idea how ironic her action was. The very officers she hoped would enforce order were about to meet the people she was calling about off-duty colleagues, friends, and seasoned law enforcement professionals. Inside the backyard, Mark quietly instructed everyone to stay calm and friendly, to step outside only if approached by the officers. He smiled reassuringly at his friends and whispered, "Everything will be fine. Let's just act normal." The laughter had faded slightly, replaced by curiosity and mild tension. For the first time, Mark felt that maybe his calm, simple BBQ had turned into something far more dramatic than he ever imagined. And so, the stage was set. What had started as a quiet, friendly celebration was now on the brink of escalation. The distant sirens, the flashing lights, and Linda's unwavering belief that she was preventing chaos had created a situation full of tension, irony, and anticipation. None of the neighbors, including Linda, had any idea how surprising and almost humorous the outcome would be. The calm birthday evening had now become a ticking moment of suspense, an ordinary backyard gathering on the edge of chaos, waiting to unfold. The flashing lights of the police cars grew brighter as they rolled slowly down the quiet street. Coming to a stop near Mark's house, the calm backyard was suddenly filled with the sound of sirens and the faint hum of radios from the police vehicles. The off-duty officers at the party glanced at each other, a mixture of amusement and curiosity on their faces. They recognized their colleagues instantly, but the on-duty officers had no idea what they were walking into. The backyard, full of friends, laughter, and the smell of grilled food, suddenly felt like the calm center in the eye of a storm. Mark stepped forward, trying to assess the situation without alarming anyone. "Stay calm," he whispered to his friends. "Let's just see what they need and handle it respectfully." The officers started moving toward the house, their hands resting lightly on their belts, as was standard procedure. They didn't yet know that the people inside were highly trained law enforcement themselves. The tension was rising, but underneath it, there was a sense of irony that made the whole scene almost comical. Though nobody realized just how comical it was, yet Linda stood by her window, eyes wide, a triumphant smile stretching across her face. She felt vindicated. The officers would soon arrive, reprimand Mark and his guests, and thank her for calling in a potentially dangerous situation. She had no idea she was about to walk directly into an ironic twist she could never have imagined. Her heart raced as she rehearsed in her mind exactly what she would say when officers approached the house. In her imagination, she was a hero protecting the neighborhood from chaos. The first officer stepped up to the driveway. His partner stayed by the car, radio in hand, scanning the area as a precaution. The sound of footsteps on the pavement mixed with the laughter and conversation from the backyard. From the front yard, Mark waved politely, stepping forward to greet them. His voice was calm and welcoming. "Evening, officers. Welcome to my house. Everything is fine. Please come in if you like." The officers paused, slightly confused by the calm and polite demeanor. Most calls like this were tense, sometimes hostile. This greeting was unexpectedly friendly. The on-duty officers approached the backyard, walking carefully but attentively. Their eyes scanned the area, noticing the familiar uniforms of the off-duty officers mingling casually. The realization started to dawn on them. Slowly, some of these people were their colleagues. The backyard was full of professionals who knew exactly how to handle difficult situations. Still, protocol required them to verify everything before leaving. They couldn't just assume a peaceful gathering. Mark's friends tried to stay relaxed, joking quietly among themselves about the irony of the situation. "She actually called us to our own house," one whispered. Another officer laughed softly, saying, "I can't believe she doesn't know who we are. This is golden." Despite the laughter, everyone stayed composed. They didn't want to escalate the situation unnecessarily. They were all trained in handling tense moments, and part of that training was keeping a calm exterior even when things were absurdly funny on the inside. Linda, still at her window, didn't notice the subtle shift in the officer's demeanor. She was pacing, muttering to herself, planning the perfect explanation for why she had called 911. "I'm just doing my duty," she said out loud. "Someone has to protect the neighborhood." She did not see Mark smiling slightly at his friends, nor did she notice the quiet amusement in the eyes of the off-duty officers. She had no idea she was about to be confronted with the full irony of her actions. As the officers reached the backyard, one of them cleared his throat politely. "Hello, sir," he said to Mark. "We received a call about a gathering here that might be disruptive. Is everything all right?" Mark nodded, gesturing toward the group. "Everything is perfectly fine. It's just a small birthday BBQ. No noise complaints, no parking issues, nothing that violates any rules, I assure you." The officer looked around, scanning the smiling faces and relaxed postures of the off-duty officers. He noticed the badges and insignias on jackets, the familiarity between the guests, and he started to understand the situation slowly. The first officer's partner approached more closely, recognizing a few colleagues by face. "Wait, aren't you all?" he began, then paused, realizing it himself. "Oh, you're the off-duty unit from Precinct 3, he said, a mixture of surprise and amusement in his voice. The tension began to dissolve, replaced by quiet laughter and shaking heads. Mark smiled politely, feeling relief wash over him. "Yes," he said calmly, "we're all friends here, just celebrating a birthday. Nothing illegal or disruptive happening." Linda, meanwhile, had stepped outside to see the situation unfold. She expected chaos, neighbors yelling, maybe people drinking too much, possibly some argument breaking out. Instead, she was met with a calm, friendly gathering and officers politely chatting with the people she believed were violating rules. Her confidence faltered, her shoulders slumped slightly as she realized the crowd wasn't what she imagined. She was confronted with a sight that made her question her assumptions, but only briefly. Pride still kept her rooted in place, unwilling to fully accept what she saw. One of the on-duty officers turned to Linda gently but firmly. "Ma'am, there is no violation here. Everything is within the law, and this is clearly a friendly, lawful gathering." Linda opened her mouth to argue but found no words. The irony hit her. She had called the police about a peaceful birthday party, only to find that the house was full of trained officers who were friends with the host. Her report, meant to protect the neighborhood, had ended up highlighting her misunderstanding. The off-duty officers at the party quietly chuckled among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief at the situation. "She actually thought she was stopping a dangerous gathering," one whispered. Another added, "She had no idea who she was dealing with. This is unbelievable." MarkEver.com guided the conversation to a friendly tone. "Everything is fine. Let's just enjoy the evening," he said, smiling. The officers nodded, satisfied that no intervention was necessary. The situation reached its peak when Linda tried to regain her authority. "But this is disruptive. This isn't allowed," she exclaimed. The officers looked at her with polite patience. "Ma'am," one said, "you may be mistaken. There is no law being broken. You should use emergency services responsibly. Calls like this are for real emergencies." The words hit her like a bucket of cold water. Her sense of pride deflated as she realized the truth. She had escalated a completely harmless situation and caused unnecessary stress for the police at that moment. The irony of the entire scenario was clear. A quiet birthday barbecue, carefully planned and fully legal, had turned into a scene where the person trying to protect the neighborhood had inadvertently involved real authorities who recognized and knew the attendees. The laughter from the off-duty officers, the polite explanations from the on-duty officers, and the shocked realization on Linda's face all combined into a moment that was absurdly humorous, if slightly tense. Mark stayed composed throughout, keeping the mood light and friendly. He offered drinks to the officers who had arrived, making small talk about work, families, and local news. The tension completely evaporated. The officers realized this was not a situation requiring action, it was a misunderstanding, fueled by fear, assumption, and a strong belief in doing the right thing. Even Linda, though embarrassed, eventually stood silently, unsure how to respond. The critical moment had passed. The confrontation that could have escalated into conflict instead became an ironic lesson. The officers smiled politely, the guests relaxed, and Mark's calm presence helped diffuse any lingering tension. What started as a routine evening had become an extraordinary story, one filled with humor, irony, and a subtle lesson about assumptions, misunderstandings, and the unexpected twists life can bring. By the end of this escalation, everyone involved understood the unusual situation they had just experienced. Linda had to step back, reassessing her actions. The officers had verified there was no real issue. Mark's friends could finally relax, laughing quietly at the absurdity of what had just unfolded. The birthday BBQ, once threatened by unnecessary intervention, was now remembered as a uniquely memorable and humorous event, one that would be talked about for a long time. The tension that had built up over the last few minutes slowly began to fade, replaced by a mix of relief and quiet amusement. The on-duty officers had taken a few moments to fully process the situation. Looking around at the backyard filled with familiar faces, badges, and uniforms, they had arrived expecting to handle a potential disturbance, a gathering that might have been violating rules or causing complaints. Instead, they found themselves in a friendly backyard, full of colleagues and friends, enjoying a peaceful birthday celebration. The reality of the situation was almost comical, and even the officers couldn't help but exchange brief smiles and quiet chuckles as they realized the irony of it all. Mark, sensing that the immediate tension had passed, stepped forward and addressed both the officers and the remaining guests. "Everything is perfectly fine," he said, his calm voice helping to smooth over the awkwardness. "I really appreciate you checking in, but there's nothing wrong here. It's just a small birthday BBQ, nothing more." He gestured toward the food, the neatly arranged chairs, and the orderly backyard. The officers looked around and nodded, confirming that there were no violations, no noise problems, and no hazards. The sense of relief among everyone was palpable. Meanwhile, Linda, standing just outside her house, was beginning to realize that the situation was not going as she had imagined. She had expected the officers to scold Mark, maybe issue some warnings, and perhaps even praise her for her diligence. Instead, they calmly explained that nothing was wrong. "Ma'am, there is no law being broken here," one officer said gently, trying not to embarrass her too publicly. "Calls to emergency services are meant for real emergencies. You should reserve them for situations that actually require immediate attention." The words were firm but polite, a gentle reprimand delivered without malice. Linda's face flushed with embarrassment. She had been so confident just minutes earlier, certain she was protecting the neighborhood, and now she was confronted with the truth of her misunderstanding. The off-duty officers at the party quietly shared glances, stifling their laughter. Some whispered jokes to one another about the irony of the situation. "She had no idea who she was calling about," one muttered. Another added, "This is going to be a story we tell for years." Mark chuckled quietly as well, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. The entire scenario was a perfect example of how assumptions and misunderstandings could spiral out of control. Yet, in this case, it had ended in humor rather than conflict. As the situation began to resolve, the on-duty officers spent a few minutes making small talk with the guests. They asked friendly questions, exchanged stories, and laughed about some of the lighter incidents from their work. The officers recognized that everyone present was trained to handle stressful situations calmly and professionally, which made the interaction smooth and almost playful. It became clear that no citations, warnings, or reprimands were necessary. Everything was as it should be, calm, safe, and friendly. The officers eventually nodded politely and began to prepare to leave, satisfied that the situation had been fully assessed and required no further action. Linda, however, remained a bit frozen in place, unsure how to respond to this unexpected outcome. She had imagined a dramatic confrontation, perhaps even a moment of public recognition for her vigilance. Instead, she was left standing quietly, realizing that her attempt to control the situation had backfired. Her sense of authority and certainty had been replaced by embarrassment and awkwardness. For a moment, she didn't know what to do, whether to apologize, defend herself, or simply retreat. Eventually, she chose to step back, quietly returning to her home without saying a word. She had learned, whether she admitted it to herself or not, that not everything required her intervention, and sometimes assumptions could lead to unnecessary complications. Back in the backyard, the mood slowly returned to normal. The off-duty officers resumed their positions near the grill, flipping burgers and passing out drinks. Laughter and conversation picked up again, this time tinged with amusement at what had just occurred. Mark leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction. The critical moment had passed without incident, and the party could continue as planned. The guests began to joke quietly about the absurdity of having police called to a house full of police. "Next time we want extra security, we'll just call Linda," someone whispered, earning soft laughter from the group. Mark's presence and calm demeanor played a crucial role in maintaining order and preventing any escalation. He understood that in moments of tension, it was important to remain composed and respectful. Regardless of the absurdity of the situation, his ability to manage the interaction between the on-duty officers, his guests, and the increasingly flustered Linda ensured that no one felt threatened or embarrassed beyond necessity. The situation, while ironic, could have easily become confrontational if handled poorly, but Mark's.com/polite approach diffused any potential conflict and turned what could have been a stressful incident into a humorous and memorable story. The on-duty officers, having verified that the gathering was lawful and safe, prepared to leave. They exchanged friendly goodbyes, reminding everyone to enjoy the rest of the evening and praising Mark for handling the situation so well. Their parting words were professional but light-hearted, acknowledging the unusual circumstances with a sense of humor. As the last of the officers drove away, the flashing lights and sirens disappeared, leaving the neighborhood quiet once again. The calm returned fully, and the guests could finally relax without concern for further interruptions. With the tension gone, Mark took a moment to reflect on what had just happened. He realized how quickly a simple, peaceful event could escalate due to assumptions and miscommunication. What had begun as a small birthday BBQ had turned into an almost cinematic scenario: flashing lights, sirens, concerned neighbors, and a critical misunderstanding by one overzealous HOA member. Yet, through patience.com communication and professionalism, the situation had resolved smoothly, without anyone being hurt or embarrassed unnecessarily. It was a reminder of the importance of staying composed in the face of unexpected challenges and maintaining a sense of humor. About life's unpredictable moments, the guests, now fully relaxed, resumed their conversations and activities. The food was passed around, drinks were shared, and laughter filled the backyard once again. Stories about past work incidents and funny neighborhood encounters flowed freely, the earlier tension becoming just another anecdote to add to their collection. Mark smiled, watching his friends enjoy themselves, feeling grateful that the critical moment had passed without incident. The resolution of the situation had allowed everyone to enjoy the evening as it was intended, a celebration of friendship, good food, and simple joy. Linda, though quietly retreating to her home, who had experienced a moment of unexpected humility, she had learned, whether consciously or not, that not all gatherings posed a threat, and that assumptions could sometimes lead to unnecessary escalation. For Mark and his guests, however, the incident became an unforgettable story, one that perfectly illustrated the irony of the situation, the importance of calm communication, and the humor that life often throws at people when least expected. The night continued peacefully, a small birthday celebration now marked by laughter, camaraderie, and the memory of a uniquely ironic and dramatic incident. By the time the evening drew to a close, Mark felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The critical moment had passed. The party had been a success despite the unexpected escalation. He had handled the situation with grace, ensuring that no one was embarrassed or harmed, and that everyone left with a story to tell. The resolution had brought clarity, humor, and a subtle lesson for everyone involved. Sometimes, staying calm, assessing the situation carefully, and communicating respectfully can turn potentially chaotic moments into memorable experiences. The backyard, now quiet again, held the remnants of food, laughter, and a story that would be recounted many times in the future, each retelling more humorous than the last. The party had finally ended, and the backyard, once filled with laughter, chatter, and the smell of grilled food, was now quiet. Chairs were stacked, the grill was cleaned, and empty plates and cups were being put away. Mark stood for a moment, looking around, taking in the aftermath of what had been one of the most unusual birthday celebrations of his life. The evening had started as a simple gathering, became a tense and ironic standoff, and finally resolved with laughter and relief. As he reflected on the events, he realized just how memorable this night had become, and how much it had taught him about people, assumptions, and the unpredictability of life. The neighbors had begun to whisper among themselves after the incident, talking about what had happened. Some had witnessed the police cars arrive and were confused at first, only to discover later that the party was completely harmless. Stories began to spread quickly through the neighborhood about the HOA lady who called 911 on a house full of police officers. Everyone who had heard the tale found it amusing, a perfect example of irony in real life. Some neighbors even chuckled at the thought of Linda, so certain she was preventing chaos, only to discover she had overreacted in the most unexpected way. The incident became a conversation starter and a small legend in the community, something that residents would tell for years. Mark, meanwhile, was helping his friends gather their belongings and get ready to leave. Even though the critical moment had passed, the atmosphere was still light. His friends laughed quietly, teasing each other about how the police had arrived and how Linda had thought she was stopping a dangerous gathering. They joked about how she had no idea who she was dealing with and how her call to 911 had inadvertently turned the party into an ironic spectacle. Mark laughed along, enjoying the humor, grateful that no one had been embarrassed in a serious way. The night had ended up far more memorable than he had ever imagined when he had first planned a simple barbecue. The off-duty officers shared quiet stories and jokes as they prepared to leave, each remarking on the absurdity of the situation. One whispered to Mark, "I can't believe she actually did that. You can't make this stuff up." Another added, "Next time, just tell her you're having a quiet book club, she might still call us." Everyone laughed softly, savoring the ridiculousness of what had happened. Mark smiled, appreciating the irony and the lesson it carried. Sometimes people act based on assumptions, and not everything needs to be escalated. The evening had become a gentle reminder of patience, humor, and perspective. Linda, meanwhile, retreated to her home and stayed there for the rest of the night. She was embarrassed, no doubt, and probably replayed the evening over and over in her mind. She had called emergency services for what turned out to be a completely peaceful and lawful gathering. Yet even in her embarrassment, there was a subtle lesson being formed. Perhaps she would think twice before making assumptions about neighbors, before calling authorities over minor matters, and before assuming she knew the full story. The incident had been humbling, though she may not have fully realized the humor in it at first. For the rest of the neighborhood, however, her mistake became a story that would be retold with laughter rather than anger in the quiet moments after the party. Mark reflected on what had happened. He realized that, even though the incident had been tense, it had also shown the importance of staying calm in unexpected situations. He had been polite, respectful, and patient, and that approach had prevented a potentially awkward or embarrassing conflict from escalating. His friends had remained composed, following his lead, and the officers had handled the situation professionally. Everyone had acted in a way that kept the peace, even while the scenario itself was absurdly ironic. Mark felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that he had successfully navigated a delicate situation without anyone being hurt or humiliated. The story quickly became an inside joke among Mark's friends. They would tease him in the days following the party, saying things like, "Next time, just let Linda know the police are already invited," or "We should bring her along, she calls us at every party." Each joke was delivered with good humor, highlighting how absurd the situation had been. Mark laughed along, knowing that this birthday BBQ would be remembered for years as one of the most ironic and funny incidents of his life. It was not just a story about a party, it was a story about people, assumptions, and how even a calm and careful plan could lead to unexpected chaos. The neighborhood itself began to see some changes after the incident. Residents talked quietly about the importance of using emergency services responsibly. Some even suggested that the HOA should remind all members about when and how to involve authorities. Linda's actions had been noticed, and while most neighbors found the situation amusing, there was also an understanding that her overzealous behavior could not be repeated without consequence. The neighborhood learned an important lesson about perspective, and about how quickly assumptions could create unnecessary stress. Mark's peaceful gathering had inadvertently become a teaching moment for everyone as the last of the guests left. Mark finally sat down on his porch looking at the quiet street and the soft glow of the evening lights. The sense of relief washed over him, mixed with amusement and gratitude. He thought about how strange the night had been. A quiet backyard celebration had turned into a situation involving multiple police vehicles, the intervention of a vigilant neighbor, and the resolution of a potential conflict through calm and patience. It was one of those nights that felt unbelievable when recalled later. A story that would be told with laughter and disbelief at the sheer irony of it all. Mark also reflected on his own role in the situation. He realized that staying calm, being polite, and maintaining a sense of humor had made all the difference. His ability to guide his friends, reassure the officers, and manage the unexpected tension had prevented the evening from turning into something stressful or unpleasant. He understood that life often presents unexpected challenges, and that responding with patience and respect was far more effective than reacting with anger or frustration. The night had been an important reminder of the value of composure and perspective in handling tricky situations. The story of the night quickly became a favorite topic of conversation among Mark's friends. Each time they recounted it, new details and jokes emerged, making it even funnier. The irony of Linda calling the police on a party full of police officers was endlessly amusing. The story highlighted the unpredictable nature of human behavior, the humor that can arise from misunderstandings, and the importance of approaching conflicts with calmness and clarity. It became a memorable chapter in their shared experiences, one that would continue to bring laughter and camaraderie for years. In the quiet aftermath, Mark felt a sense of fulfillment. The birthday had been a success, the tension had been resolved, and the night had ended peacefully. Even though it had been filled with unexpected drama, the experience reinforced important lessons about patience, communication, and the unpredictability of life. He was grateful for his friends, who had supported him, laughed with him, and helped navigate the evening with good humor. He felt that the night had strengthened not just his friendships, but also his own ability to handle unexpected situations gracefully. As he closed the door and headed inside his home, Mark thought about how small, ordinary events could sometimes turn into extraordinary stories. A quiet birthday BBQ had become a tale of irony, humor, and unexpected lessons, one that would be remembered not just by him and his friends, but by the entire neighborhood. The night had left its mark on everyone involved, from the off-duty officers to the neighbors, and even Linda herself, who had been reminded, albeit awkwardly, about the consequences of assumptions and overreactions. Mark went to bed that night feeling content. The backyard was quiet, the police had left, the guests had gone home, and the strange, ironic episode had finally come to an end. He knew that the story of his birthday BBQ would be retold for years, laughed over at gatherings, and shared with anyone who appreciated a good example of life's unpredictability. In the end, the evening had become more than a celebration. It had become a memorable lesson, an unforgettable experience, and a story of human nature, humor, and the importance of keeping perspective no matter how strange a situation might seem. Even in the days that followed, the memory of the night lingered. Mark's friends would call or text, laughing about little details, reminding him of how absurd it had all been. Neighbors still whispered to one another about the incident, shaking their heads in disbelief and amusement, and Linda, though still perhaps proud of her diligence, had learned a subtle, unspoken lesson about assumptions, the importance of context, and the humor that often hides in human behavior. Mark smiled quietly to himself, knowing that the party, the misunderstanding, and the resolution had all combined to create a story worth telling, a story that reflected the chaos, humor, and unpredictability of real life.